Join us in exploring the complexities of the Yom Kippur War. If you find this video insightful, please give it a like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe for more engaging content. Peace in the Middle East proved fleeting after Israel's resounding victory in 1967, leading to the Yom Kippur War of 1973, a conflict with enduring global implications. Following the Six-Day War, victorious Israeli forces began constructing fortifications along the Suez Canal to protect Sinai, known as the Bar-Lev Line. It stretched approximately 100 miles from the Gulf of Suez in the south of the Mediterranean in the north. Along this line were 30 strategically placed strongpoints known as mausim, each protected by a sandbag several meters high. To the east of the canal, two roads, the artillery road and the lateral road, facilitated easy movement of forces across the front. In response to this construction, the Egyptians launched sustained artillery strikes on the new Israeli positions and initiated commando raids into Israel, making the beginning of the war of attrition. Israel's retaliation with its own commando operations and an airport offensive aimed at the Egyptian air defense system, intended to compel Egypt into accepting a ceasefire. Recognizing the threat posed by the Israeli air superiority, President Nasser flew to Moscow to acquire advanced SA-2 and SA-3 surface-to-air missile technicians and combat pilots from the Soviets. On August 7, 1970, a 6-month ceasefire was brokered by the US, maintaining the status quo in the region. The war of attrition developed Israeli morale and demonstrated that the Israeli Air Force could be countered. Nasser did not live to see the outcome, as he passed away on September 28, 1970, and was succeeded by Anwar Sadat. Sadat signed a 50-year treaty of friendship with the Soviets and attempted to negotiate peace with Israel, proposing that the IDF withdraw 32 kilometers east of the Suez Canal beyond this strategic passage. The Israelis declined, prompting Sadat to settle on war as the only viable option. By mid-1971, despite continued Soviet arms shipments to Egypt, including numerous Scud missiles, regimes reluctant to fully support Egypt and improved US-USSR relations led to the eventual exposure of Soviet personnel from Egypt by mid-1972. Sadat then turned to Syria's President Hafez al-Assad, persuading him to reclaim the lands lost in 1967. Financial aid was secured from oil-rich Saudi Arabia and Qatar, with the promises of troops and aircraft from Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Libya, Morocco, Sudan, and Iraq, although most of these contingents failed to arrive in time. Realistic about his army's capabilities, Sadat understood they could not decisively defeat the IDF in an open conflict, so he opted for a limited war strategy. He and his allies devised a surprise attack plan across the Suez Canal and the Golan Heights to challenge Israelis' perceived invincibility and leverage diplomatic pressure for favorable peace. The Yom Kippur War proceeded by events on each front that significantly influenced Israeli perception of the military situation. On September 7, 1973, Syrian fighters scrambled to intercept an Israeli reconnaissance aircraft, resulting in an aerial dogfight 200 kilometers northwest of Israel over the Mediterranean. Despite downing Syrian planes with no Israeli losses, the Syrians were able to concentrate their forces on the Golan Heights without raising suspicion, projecting strength after the aerial skirmish. In the south, Egyptian armies concentrated their forces along the Suez Canal under the guise of a training exercise, maintaining an appearance of normalcy to deceive the IDF. Soldiers strolled along the canal without helmets, engaged in fishing, and planted false criticisms of Egyptian use of Soviet equipment in Cairo newspapers. However, IDF observers still noted unusual levels of military activity in the area. When the Israeli High Command discussed this situation on September 13th, Intelligence Chief Major General Eli Zeira assured the government that the likelihood of war was low. However, after receiving details of the Egyptian offensive, known as Operation Badr, at 4 hours on the morning of October 6, preparation for mobilization began, though it was already too late. Just before 2 p.m., on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism calendar. Over 200 Egyptian aircraft flew low over the Suez Canal, launching strikes on Israeli surface-to-air missile battery, airfield, command posts, and other infrastructure in Sinai. The attacks achieved success, but Egypt lost 40 aircraft to air combat and ground fire. Simultaneously, 2 Tu-16 bombers flew over the Mediterranean and fired AS-5 Kelp missiles at Tel Aviv, demonstrating that any Israeli attempt at a strategic bombing would be met in kind. In Sinai, 14 additional Tupolev bombers successfully targeted desert installations. The ground bombardment began simultaneously, with over 2,000 artillery pieces including howitzers, heavy mortars, and Katyusha rocket launchers, compelling the Bar-Lev line, supported by tanks positioned on sand ramps. During the initial minute of Operation Badr, approximately 10,500 shells struck the first line of Israeli defenses. Shortly after the bombardment commenced, the specialized Egyptian tank hunter squadrons, armed with RPGs and Maltuka anti-tank missiles, crossed the Suez Canal and seized ambush positions designated Israeli tank emplacements. Behind them were 2 Egyptian armies, the second in north, commanded by Major General Saad Mamoun, and the third in the south, led by Major General Abdel Munim Vassal. Together, they comprised 5 infantry divisions, 2 armored divisions, and 3 mechanized divisions, along with several independent brigades. The infantry units, in particular, were equipped with sustained quantities of anti-tank weaponry designed to counter Israeli armor-heavy assaults. Assaults across the entire front commenced in waves at 2:40 p.m., with the engineering corps breaching the high sandbanks using high-pressure water hoses. Concurrently, Soviet-made folding bridges were deployed to facilitate the crossing of Egyptian armor and artillery. In the ensuing days, Israeli Air Force jets became bogged down, continuing targeting these bridges and sustaining significant losses from the Egyptian air defense network. Essentially, Israelis' primary advantage was rendered virtually ineffective. The waves of infantry advanced several kilometers inland, establishing a defense front, while especially trained units dealt with the Mauzim strong points, which were gradually overrun. Captured or surrendered along almost the entire line, IDF armor columns rushed instinctively to the front to retrieve the strong points, but were severely mauled and repulsed by the anti-tank squadrons lying in ambush. Israeli headquarters was in utter confusion at the start of Egyptian success, and by dawn they faced tens of thousands of enemy soldiers, hundreds of tanks, and extensive amounts of both ground and anti-aircraft artillery battery, along with SAM sites on the eastern bank. On the 8th, an armored IDF counterattack by 2 tank divisions was launched under Major General Avraham Aden and Ariel Sharon, but was again repulsed with devastating losses at the hands of artillery fire and anti-tank infantry. Although fierce fighting continued after the assault, the IDF managed to stabilize the Sinai front by October 9, with Ariel Sharon's Almond division skillfully maneuvering and destroying 15 Egyptian tanks a day later. Egypt's armies had achieved their limited objective, to repulse an Israeli counterattack with massive losses, but pressure on the similarly active Syrian front on the Golan Heights necessitated a further Egyptian offensive to relieve it, as Israel had concentrated its forces there. The IDF command had been paralyzed with indecision before this point, but knowledge of this upcoming Egyptian attack made the course of action very clear: block it, crush it, and counterattack. On October 14th, hundreds of heavy guns opened up along the artillery road, while fighter bombers attacked Israeli ground targets in preparation for the assault. In the northern sector, the Egyptian 18th Infantry Division and a brigade of 262 tanks attacked from Al-Qatar to Ramadi. Here, Aden's division pushed the Egyptians back to their origin point, destroying at least 50 tanks. In the center, Ariel Sharon's division bore the brunt of the 21st Armored Division's assault leading from Ismailia, meeting a similar fate to its northern counterpart. In this fighting, the 14th Armored Brigade destroyed 93 tanks of the Egyptian 1st Armored Brigade, effectively neutralizing it as a fighting unit. South of Chiron, an Egyptian armored thrust by the 4th Armored Division and 3rd Armored Brigade aimed at the Giri and Mitla passes was repulsed at the cost of 60 tanks and was nearly annihilated by the IIF. The Egyptians advanced and lost their anti-air umbrella, leaving them dangerously vulnerable to air attacks. Further south, an Egyptian task force consisting of an infantry and tank brigade attacked towards Ras Sodar along the Gulf of Suez, but was repelled with ease by Major General Yashiyahu Galish. The attacks escalated into a massive armored battle. In just 2 hours, the catastrophic Egyptian offensive was decisively defeated. Of the 400 tanks committed, 260 were destroyed, and the way was clear for a massive Israeli counterattack. The Israelis lost just 20 vehicles. The tide of war had shifted, and the Egyptians were confined back into their beachheads. The Israelis now favored the idea of crossing the Suez Canal and compelling Egypt into a ceasefire, increasingly plausible due to US aid in the former Operation Nickel Grass. A broadly outlined plan known as Operation Gazelle had been deployed before the war for this precise scenario. Once adapted for the situation, it included deployment of 2 bridges across the canal near Fort Matsman, situated in a pre-scheduled location that minimized travel time, supplies, and reinforcements. Crossing began on the 16th and continued for several days. In Sinai, focus was on repelling Egyptian counterattacks, which involved a significant number of infantry soldiers and armor. By the 19th, IDF forces pushed into the Egyptian rear, cutting off the 3rd Army's supply line while encircling. Meanwhile, the war's broader regional implications were becoming evident. America, alarmed by the rising Arab nationalism and oil prices in the region, increased pressure on Israel for a ceasefire. Israel's swift military success led to increasing diplomatic tensions, resulting in a ceasefire brokered by the UN. Security Council on October 22, 1973, would play a significant role in shaping peace efforts following the war, with implications for both American foreign policy and regional stability in the Middle East. The Yom Kippur War changed the dynamics of the Middle East, leading to a re-evaluation of peace and war strategies and setting the stage for future negotiations. If you enjoyed this exploration, please like, share, and subscribe for more content.